So yeah, I suppose then it would be kind of good for us both to kind of introduce ourselves.
Yeah.
Whoever's watching, why don't you go first?
Okay. So I'm Mick Cooper. I'm a professor of counselling at the University of Roehampton. I mainly teach on the doctorate in counselling psychology, and I head up research. Live down in Brighton. Got 4 kids. Struggling a bit with coronavirus, like I think a few of us are, just to live a normal life, but just about managing it so far.
Yeah. And I'm Fraser Smith, and I'm a counselling psychologist in training up in Glasgow. I'm hopefully only 4 months away from my doctorate, so long as coronavirus maintains its distance. And yeah, live at home with my heavily pregnant wife at the moment. So coronavirus is a topic that's very much in our radar at the moment, as she's part of that vulnerable group. So yeah, just trying to maintain a bit of normality in these times. And I think you and I, Mick, we had discussed over email, maybe it would be a really good opportunity. I know we chatted quite a lot at different conferences and via email and whatnot, and thought it would be a pretty good idea for us to maybe collaborate and share some of our thoughts on what it's like in these times, and the importance of being congruent to these times, but also trying to find positivity in what's a really challenging set of circumstances. I'm kind of interested in what your probably initial thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the challenge, isn't it? Is to be genuine about it and to be real and to have space where we can be upset and sad, but also allow ourselves to kind of move through that. And I think when you let yourself, and having people that you're in contact with, that you can express those feelings with and feel those feelings with and talk about how terrible it feels, but then allow yourself to move through that and to be in a more positive space as well.
Yeah, I think it's a real, what I found is that it's a real challenging balance, because obviously you, a counselling psychologist for a while, and me in training, you know, a lot of our work and our training is about that kind of being congruent to what's going on, being honest, being open, accepting some of the challenges and vulnerabilities. And that for me feels important, but it also feels important to try and find what is some positives in what we're experiencing. That's been a real challenge, that balance, because at times I think, you know, I've tried to seek out those positivities, and I've thought, you know, am I not being honest and real about how I actually feel about this? Because there's a huge amount of me that's quite anxious. And I think trying to strike that balance, I think maybe having a pregnant wife as well has got a big part of that, with you as well, with family. It's similar.
It is, but you know, I think part of the role of being a psychologist or a counsellor or psychotherapist is about holding those anxieties. And that's the, you know, that, and in many ways that's our job. That's what we do. We work with people, and the difference between what mental health professionals often do and what lay people would do is that when people talk about things that are scary, we stay with that, and we stay with that because our training is that we learn to recognize that, and we learn to know when we're feeling that and when we're feeling scared, and that we develop the skills to be able to stand away from that and just create that space where it's tough, Fraser. You know, our role is to hold other people's anxieties, and we, like you say, we get scared. I totally understand. You know, it's scary at the moment, and but without that distance, you know, one of the images that is used a lot at the moment with the virus is about having a firebreaker. And in a sense, we're emotional firebreakers. We're the chain in the link that, you know, we go into the supermarket and we see the 2 rolls of toilet paper there. And instead of being the one who thinks, God, I've got to have that, we think, okay, I want that. And I know that other people are going to need that. And I'm going to stand back from that fear and that desperation and leave the space for others. That's what we're there for in many ways.
Yeah, I like that term is emotional firebreakers, and it's interesting as well as how training in psychology or psychotherapy, it's not just siloed to the one-to-one work with clients. It's more of a social thing now. It's a cultural element. You know, we're psychologists, we're therapists, or we're trainees and such, and therefore we have a certain set of values and standards, and those carry with us out with just that one-to-one work as well. And I think as well, you know, that transition from seeing clients online now, this is the first time, at least in, you know, I'm sure there's plenty of other situations where therapists can personally relate to a story that a client is saying, but this is the first time for me that I'm in the pit with many of these clients. You know what I'm trying to say? I'm sure you're the exact same. It's every client this week, the main theme has been coronavirus, really. And I'm like, yeah, feel exactly what you're saying. Like, I totally get there. I'm in that as well. In my head, I'm saying that, I totally empathize with that. And there is something really valuable about how we work with that, because you're right. Our jobs are there to hold that anxiety. They're there to hold the challenge, and we don't run away from these difficulties. It's the same with any client. The client who's experiencing grief or trauma or severe anxiety or depression, we run to that with the client. We don't shy away from that. And I suppose it's challenging for us, isn't it? Because in a professional sense, we're in the midst of the coronavirus. When we turn on the TV at night, coronavirus is there. So for me, at least, it's kind of felt quite all-consuming, and trying to balance that with also finding that, there's plenty of positives that are going on as well. There's things that we can celebrate at the same time. It's a challenge.
And there are positives. I mean, I never knew about Zoom virtual backgrounds until
yeah, exactly.
Coronavirus. Suddenly, everybody's got beaches at the back of their and space scenes. So I've learned about that. Zoom is fantastic. God knows what we would have done without Zoom.
We were,
and sometimes, I mean, one thing that I put online recently was a study that actually one of our students, actually Trina, had done a couple of years ago about relational depth in online therapies. And she found that when she interviewed clients who'd had online therapy and talked to them about relational depth, actually a lot of them experienced the depth of relating, as much so as in face-to-face. Very similar experiences of a real strong sense of connection with their therapist, and a sense of really going into very deep places. And in some ways, for some of them, actually, the online actually made it easier for them, because maybe they were kind of quite anxious about being in a room with someone, or they felt a bit inhibited, and they felt freer. Some felt freer to talk when it was online, and they just had a little bit like this. I mean, it wasn't true for all of them. I know some clients don't like online work. It's challenging, but I don't think we should assume that just because something's online, you can't still have that depth of relating, and we're adjusting, and we need to adjust. And there is something about adjusting. I mean, Viktor Frankl talks about this, the wonderful existentialist writer, and talks about the way that even in situations of suffering and challenge, and of course in his circumstances so much worse being in Auschwitz, that you can find meaning. And that's not just about being positive. And I mean, what's lovely about Frankl's work, actually, maybe this is an important phrase there, is that he doesn't talk about kind of being positive so much and being happy about it. He talks about finding meaning, and he talks about the possibility of finding meaning in suffering and learning. And I guess that's the challenge for many of us at the moment, is to find meaning. That it was lovely last night, people out cheering for the NHS, and people volunteering and signing up to do something, and trying to find something meaningful out of this situation.
And I think in his book, one of my all-time favorites, Man's Search for Meaning, in what are just unbelievable circumstances that he found himself in. And you're right, it wasn't about, right, how can we make the best of this, or how can we feel positive? It was about how can we pursue purpose in what is impending doom. And it was, and in his circumstances, they were far more severe than what we're experiencing now during the Holocaust. But that's absolutely the case today. Like, how do we establish a purpose, or how do we establish a meaning, both individually and as a group, as a society, in what seems like really scary circumstances? And I was the same, like last night at 8:00, people clapping for the NHS, and I was like, that's a community that's coming together a little bit more in the face of what's very uncertain and scary times. And it's the same with people that have signed up for the NHS volunteership program, which I think is tremendous if it's rolled out correctly. There's again a meaning, a purpose. The person who looks after their elderly neighbour, or checks in with them and seeing how they're doing, or FaceTimes their gran. These kind of things are like, that's a search for purpose. That's people establishing meaning in what are really challenging circumstances.
Yeah, and it's something about being able to stand back from the circumstances and not to be all consumed by it. And I guess that's what we were talking about earlier, Fraser, is you can call it mentalizing, mindfulness, consciousness, awareness. It's the key to so much of our work. Is that ability to stand back from our kind of immediate feelings and our immediate emotions, not to deny them, not to rubbish them. And in fact, in some ways, it's about embracing them and kind of really recognizing that they're there, but also going, standing back and saying, what can I do that's different, or what can I? It's about, transcendence, I guess, is another word for it. It's about transcending, and that's what Frankl talks a lot about. Is about transcending. I think a book for this time, if people haven't read it, Man's Search for Meaning. I mean, that's going to be helpful for anyone, I think, right now.
I did a little Instagram live on GetPsyched the other day, and was talking about, you know, my favorite books, the books that I've kind of come back to, and The Alchemist, Paulo Coelho is one of mine, and Man's Search for Meaning is the other one. And it's, you know, just reading through a little bit of that again when you're kind of stuck in your flat, it's been quite amazing just how many connotations there are to what we're kind of going through. Again, not to the severe circumstances that Franco experienced, but you know, there's still so much that we can obtain from his story, I think, in a situation like this. And you know, as well, like what you're saying, you know, you're right, there's a part of us that needs to step out whilst accepting what's going on and recognizing what's going on. There is that part of us that needs to step out of that box. And I think that's one of the challenges for me has been, and I was thinking of this the other day, this is one of the first times in my life where what I've seen on the news is happening out on my street, if you know what I'm trying to say. Like, so you see people with face masks, or you see empty streets on the news down in London and Glasgow or Belfast or wherever. And then you go out and you see, gosh, yeah, that's what this is what this is like right now. And I think for so long with the news, you know, you might hear of some war-torn country or some horrible situation that's going on with a family in our country or something, and there's an easy detachment there. And that's, you know, it feels difficult to say that, but there's a distance there. With this, we're very much in the mix of that. So I think that's a really important point, that it's really important to stay present with what's going on, but also have those opportunities to try and step outside of that box and see the situation for what it really is. That's a balance that I'm struggling with at points, but I think it's a really important one as well.
Yeah, because there is a reality, and I absolutely know what you mean about this is real. And I guess in some ways we live our lives these days through TV and through kind of social media, and everything is mediated, and there's a kind of unreality to everything, that the kind of things that happen in our lives are often on the TV screen. Yeah. And as you say, what's happening is we are the news. What we're going through right now is what people will talk about for a very long time. Yeah, so my kids, you know, your kids are going to be asking you, what was the coronavirus pandemic of 2020 like?
Yeah.
And there's something, you know, and again, it maybe not looking at positive, but there's something about the kind of reality that the heightened energy around now, that we, you know, people talk about living in the here and now, and it's one thing to talk about it, but we are living in the here and now. This is the here and now, and there's no escaping.
No,
and sometimes I do feel it, Fraser. Sometimes I do just have this sense of real aliveness. Actually, I've got to admit, sometimes, not often, not as much as the feelings of worry and anxiety and, oh my God, what's going to happen, but sometimes you get a sense of being carried in this kind of aliveness of not kind of being in some kind of haze of reality and kind of smaller worries and things. It's going to put a lot of things in perspective, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And what you've said there makes me think a lot about, you know, what's valuable for clients in our work in therapy anyway, and individuals that I see in therapy, is that there's an aliveness. That's a really good word to describe that. I feel that they often experience when there's a fuller acceptance of the situation that they're experiencing, that's going on for them. And I feel like, and I'm aware of my, you know, how early I am in my professional career, but I feel like more distress and challenge is experienced by individuals when they run away from the difficulties that are going on in front of them. And actually part of our role as therapists is to help, you know, accept and recognize that these are challenges that are going on, but in accepting that, and accepting those difficulties and accepting those anxieties, there is an aliveness that can come from that. And I felt that as well, you know, recognizing that again, that there's some really amazing parts to this in many ways. You know, we'll look back at times like this and say, hopefully at least, we'll say, you know, yes, we see panic buying, yes, we see greed, or we see all that kind of thing. But there's real positives as well. There's a community that's coming together, hopefully. There's a people that are recognizing and looking out for one another and helping those that are in greater need than us. And I think in recognizing and accepting those anxieties and all the madness that's going on with this, we do start to feel that aliveness a little bit more. I totally agree with you. It makes me think a little bit about, you know, a social media post that you put up recently about, and you said that about therapists being firebreakers, and your post seemed to get so much interaction, man. You get like crazy interaction from people. It's really, really cool to see. And I think you said something about therapists in this time being the emotional backbone of this country and well, of the world really, when we're going through something like this. And you were talking a little bit about the relational depth there that you can still obtain through online therapy. It sounds like now more than ever, therapists are needed. Therapists are being recognised as well, and that's, you know, many therapists be part of the NHS too. Do you feel that? Are you experiencing that?
I think therapists are just doing incredible work at the moment. Just counsellors, psychotherapists, psychologists, just being out there, working online with people, holding people's emotional anxieties and fears. It's a really tough time for people. It's a tough time for us, and to be the kind of sponges taking on so much of that emotion.
Yeah.
You know, it may not get the recognition, and you know, and we may not be in the front line in the same way that kind of nurses and doctors are.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's critical work. It's critical work, and I think that you know, it's really important for us to be able to recognise for ourselves just how important it is to be able to hold that. Yeah, I was talking about being the kind of emotional backbone of the country, that where there's that anxiety and sadness and loss and grief, and we know there's going to be more to come. But being able to hold that for people, being able to work with people in that, it's a critical role. It's critical. I don't think it's ever been so clear.
Yeah.
What this kind of army of therapists is able to offer. And I hope people remember that. I hope people remember that as they go into their days and get up in the morning and think, right, I got to see this, or I don't really like working online, and you know, all the things, but just the vital role that people are playing.
I think as well, like, it's really nice to hear you say that, because I can imagine many therapists feel, you know, like doctors and nurses as well, everybody is in this pit altogether, and we're having to try and manage it ourselves and understand it. And after a session, when we hang up on Zoom and stuff, we then have to, you know, try and manage our own anxieties and our family's anxieties as well, and things like that. And I think as well, in a culture where this pandemic is so physical health orientated, at least, it's so quite there's quite a focus of, you know, physical illness and what this is going to do to us physically. Sometimes that mental health element can feel like it needs to take a backseat. But if we do that, I feel we're at risk of further physical illness, and we know the correlation between mental health and physical health, of course. And I think as well, it comes from that sense that, you know, this period of isolation or social distancing and things like that, that's like, you know, that's going to have a toll on people's mental health. If they're doing that for 12 weeks, you know, if they're in there for 3 weeks even, you know, we've been self-isolating now for almost a couple of weeks because my wife's now, because she's pregnant and stuff, you know, that's going to have a toll on us if we're not integrating with other people in appropriate ways, if we're not going out for that once a day walk. So I think you're right. I think now more than ever, therapy, and I've always been a big supporter of the fact that therapists need to go to where the people are. You know, and when I work with GetPsyched, a lot of that is social media based, YouTube based, because that's where people reside nowadays. That's where there's a lot of people that are on social media, they're accessing YouTube videos. And I think, you know, we need to have more conversations like this via Zoom. We need to be putting more stuff online, because that's more people are going to be there. They need to know that there's that mental health support, there's that therapeutic support. In a time that is so physical health orientated, we still need to focus on that mental health side of things. And it's great that therapists are doing that.
Yeah, and as you say, Fraser, I mean, if people's mental health isn't good, if people are struggling with depression and anxiety, that's going to impact on them physically. And that's going to affect their immune systems. That's going to affect their ability to fight off infections. So these things are really linked. And if people become demoralized, if people are just kind of sitting there with anxiety, that's not going to be good for them. That's not going to be good in terms of how they behave and in terms of panic buying. I mean, you know, when you go into the shop, the shops are empty, not for physical reasons, they're empty for psychological reasons. Absolutely. You know, because people are getting into panic cycles. And unless there's forces which are calming people down, just holding that anxiety and saying it's okay, you know, that's what we need at the moment. We need people working vitally on the physical side, but on the mental side, we need people who are able to say it's okay, we'll get through this. Tell me what you're scared about. I'm going to take that seriously. I'm not going to tell you, you know, there's nothing to worry about, but I'm going to listen to you and I'm going to connect with you. And I think one of the things we're learning, ironically, at the time of social distancing, is just how important connection is, and that relation, that ability for people to reach out, Zoom, Skype, you know, out the windows, talking to each other, any ways that they can. because we're social beings, and we're all connected, not just with the people we know and love, but also as a planet. You know, we really see
Absolutely.
that connection, and
Yeah.
nothing is shown more clearly, I think, ever, that as a planet we're connected. And I hope that something that we'll learn, you know,
Yeah.
that will come out of that will be a sense of kind of global connection, that we're all tied in together, that what happens on one side of the planet is going to affect people on the other side of the planet, and that we need to work together, pull together, be empathic and understanding towards each other, because you know this is a catastrophe.
Yeah.
But you know, there's other catastrophes that are waiting in the wings. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, without wanting to get too political, climate change
Yeah, for sure.
is a reality.
Yeah.
And in the same way that people have put off coronavirus in place, and climate change is out there, it is coming. And if this can wake up to people to the reality that we can be affected by things, unless we're careful, unless we look out for each other.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And also with the climate change side of things, I think, you know, I think so often with climate change, we feel so distant from that, or as a people, I'm speaking as a people, we feel so distant from that. We're not, well, for me, you know, I'm not living beside a polluted river, or I'm not able to go, unable to go out because of fog pollution or anything as such, although that's obviously still having an impact. With something like this, we feel much more connected to it. So hopefully we do learn lessons from other impending catastrophes and situations that, you know, are inevitably going to happen if we don't do something about it.
Yeah, you know, sorry to interrupt, Fraser, but one of the things that Rogers talks about when he talks about the conditions is about I think the first one is about the client being in a state of vulnerability,
Yeah.
Or incongruence. And you know, therapy happens when people recognize their vulnerability. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting one, isn't it? On the one hand, our role is to hold that anxiety. On the other, it's to, you know, help people recognize or talk about that vulnerability that is there, to recognize the vulnerability of the planet, of ourselves as a global community, that, you know, to see that we're not invulnerable.
No.
And our role as therapists is not to kind of shore up a kind of false invulnerability. It's to help people recognize their vulnerability, to talk about it, and to feel connected through it. You know, we don't take it away.
No.
But what we do is we help people see that in their vulnerability, they can still be connected to others.
Yeah.
And that's where the safety comes from, not from a kind of mask of invulnerability.
And I think as well, there's a value, and I use the word lightly, there is a positivity to recognizing how vulnerable we are from a situation like this, you know, how fragile we are and how susceptible we are to something, you know, to this extent. I mean, I was reading something the other day about I think they call patient zero from Wuhan, where, you know, this fundamentally stemmed over 4 or 5 months. We're in this position from a couple of people that went to a food market in, you know, in a far off city in China. And I think that kind of really struck me. I was like, gosh, we are so vulnerable in this situation, you know, and an acceptance that that's where we are is, and in a climate as well with political figures, again, not getting too political, but where vulnerability is run away from, and we're not vulnerable, and, you know, we're not shutting down our country, and, you know, this isn't a country that goes into lockdown, all that kind of nonsense. You know, there's still this mentality that vulnerability is something to run away from, or incongruence is something to run away from. And if anything, I hope we can start to recognize that it's valuable to accept that, and the strength in being able to accept our vulnerabilities, and exactly what Roger said as well.
Yeah. Because I think ideally what the dynamic is that where people are vulnerable, what that elicits then is care.
Yeah.
And it's the care and the concern for each other is where we see each other's vulnerabilities, and when we recognize our own vulnerability, is so much of a healthier dynamic than the mask of invulnerability, which generates kind of anger, resentment, envy, disinterest, kind of caring, that dynamic. And you know, Trump is the obvious example of someone who masquerades an invulnerability, that I think does such a disservice to so many things. That we need leaders who can, you know, like in New Zealand, where people are more able to be honest and open, and that if what can come out of this is a society where people can be more vulnerable and more caring.
Absolutely. And I think in many ways that's kind of where we see, you know, the panic buying has been a big theme. And, you know, I think in people's vulnerability, there comes a panic when they're not willing to maybe accept that vulnerability or recognize it. And so they'll go out and buy 25 rolls of toilet paper, or they'll buy 40 cans of tuna or something. You know, it's like a response to that fear, isn't it? Yeah, it's and I think in society as well, I've heard in the news that we immediately associate like things like panic buying to greed or self-interest or people that are just bad people, you know, when actually if we were to really step back and look at it, these people are afraid, these people are vulnerable, these people are honest, are really terrified of what's going on. And like what you said about therapists being that emotional backbone, I feel like we need to bring that voice and say, well, no, more than just the fact or the thought that these are bad people. You know, it's like we all feed off one another as well. And it made me think a lot about game theory and psychological theory, where there's like a balance of rules that everybody applies to, and then somebody breaks those rules, and we then think, right, in order for us to keep up or stay alive, we've got to, you know, that's unfair. I've got to break the rules now as well, and it just dominoes, and so we're a product of that. You know, it's so psychological based. It's so basic.
And what it needs to break that, what you need is trust.
Yeah.
Because you need to trust that if you don't panic buy that toilet roll, that the next person isn't going to panic buy it, and everybody's just going to buy what they need. And that trust can only come about when we recognize our kind of interconnection, and we allow ourselves, rather than each person fighting for themselves as humanity did for, you know, tens of thousands of years before we hit kind of civilization. You know, civilization is about developing those networks of trust, where we allow ourselves to trust that the other is not going to do things that are going to harm us. And again, you know, something can come out. We are in our technological world, we have the connection. If we can allow ourselves to feel more that trust, if we can evolve as more trusting beings, then that would be something good to come out of this. I really hope something good comes out.
Yeah, that would be nice. And it's nice to hear as well, you say, you know, it kind of goes back to one of your original points. I'm aware that you've got some meetings coming up, so I'm gonna let you go in a minute, but it makes me think as well about what you said about therapists maintaining their identity, or psychologists or psychotherapists, counselors, whoever, mental health practitioners, maintaining their identity into society and into culture, that this is more than just that one-to-one work that you have with a client over Zoom. And it's great to hear from on an empirical stance that we can still establish relational depth via Zoom as well. You know, we don't have to feel like we're limiting ourselves, but that goes past Zoom as well. It goes out into that world where you said, you know, there's 2 rolls of toilet paper left. I'm not going to take the last 2. You know, if I really need one, I'm going to take one. Or, you know, I don't need any, I'm going to leave it. That's you know, that's that establishment of trust. And again, there's a role here, there's a calling for therapists and people in mental health to be that emotional backbone, to not just once we hang up on Zoom, that's our role ended. It transcends into our everyday life as well. And it's really exciting to hear you say that.
Yeah, maybe that's going to be one of the new core conditions, that a necessary and sufficient condition is only taking 1 roll of toilet paper.
I'm sure there's a paper in there somewhere, mate. I like you first author in that, but yeah, there's a paper in there somewhere.
But it's true, you know, it is true. And it's that mentality and that stance of empathy, trust, acceptance of others, that pervading, allowing that to pervade, not just that, not, you know, I don't think we can be that caring therapist and then go out and panic buy in the shops. We can be someone who's scared, and of course we get scared. But I think there is a responsibility at some level to be the person who holds that line and is that emotional firebreaker that doesn't kind of get into an individualistic, distrusting way, however difficult. And of course we will sometimes, but we've got such a critical role that our society right now needs those people when things get scarier, and then they're going to get scarier as well, you know, at times.
Yeah, they are.
And that we can hold that, and that we can hold that maturity. It's lovely to talk to you, Fraser.
Yeah, you too, Mick. I really do appreciate it. It's you know, at conferences and, you know, training through counselling psychology, you're a cornerstone figure in my training and stuff. So it's a real honour to get this opportunity to chat to you. I really do mean it. Thank you so much for taking your time out. I know you're a busy man.